Welcome to this Q&A session for the film Island of Lost Boys, which is part of the 31st edition of Nordisk Panorama Film Festival. This film is not only nominated for New Nordic Voice, it also has a chance to win the Audience Award. So don't forget to vote online after this session, just follow the link. My name is Robert Goodman, and I'll be the host of this Q&A. And I have the pleasure of talking with Kristin Heien, who is the director of Island of Lost Boys. Kristin, the subject of this film seems quite a shift from your previous project, an NRK series for children called Animal Friend, though perhaps it has a connection to the radio documentary you did for NRK called From the Mouths of Babes and Drunks. So, why did this story attract you, and how did you gain access to Trond and Benjamin and the Norwegian prison system?
Hi, I grew up just across the fjord from the prison island of Bastøy. So I've always been curious about this environment. And I also made a podcast for the NRK, which gave me the access to this island. And I wanted to make a film from the outside looking in. And now I'm not talking about from the outside of the island, but from the outside of society. And this island is a place where you live on the side of society. You're not in a prison with walls, but you are imprisoned with walls of water. And I was curious about how these men view society and how they look at themselves, trying to get back into society.
Okay. From the outside, the high security prisons look pretty imposing. From the inside, they look more like low-income apartment housing, perhaps with the exception of the front door. So why does what has been called the most humane prison system in the world still feel so damaging to the inmates?
Well, it's not about buildings. It's not about the looks. Mainly, it's about how you are treated as a human being. And a lot of prisoners, research show that if you are imprisoned over a long time, it may damage you in serious ways. And a lot of prisoners also in the Norwegian society or in the Norwegian system experience these damages and experience that they are more estranged from society after years of imprisonment. So what we wanted to do with this film was to show the importance of open prisons as a way of preparing yourself for a return to society, because in Norway, no one is imprisoned for life. All criminals will eventually be released and will become someone's neighbor. So the whole idea is what kind of neighbor would you want? Who would you want to be? The guy living next door, someone who has been imprisoned in a high security prison and maybe damaged, as seriously. Or someone who has had a chance to prepare themselves for a more normal life.
Do you think it's the regimentation where, every minute of their day is kind of pre-planned for them, so that they have very little choice in what their options are at the moment, that is the hardest thing for them?
I think it varies a lot, but obviously losing your freedom, the chance to decide, what is my day going to look like? What is my life going to look like? That's part of it. But also how you are treated as a human. Are you treated with respect, or are you treated as just a man with a number, someone who's a part of a system? What kind of value do you have as a human being? Are you seen as just as a criminal, as someone who has committed a crime? Do we as society want to, is it the question of revenge? Or are you seen as someone who deserves to get, a second chance?
And why did you decide to focus on Trond and Benjamin?
They have both committed serious crimes. They have both committed murder. And they have been imprisoned for a long time. Benjamin has been almost half his life behind walls. So they're obviously affected by this imprisonment. And they also knew at the time when we started filming that they would be released eventually, and they were looking ahead, trying to make a future for their own. And we wanted to follow that journey and see, is it possible? What are the options? Because the backdrop of this film is that although Norway is known as, the world's most humane correctional system, we still, there has been some shifts and some changes politically that caused politicians to shut down many of the well-functioning open prisons. And that led to less prisoners getting this chance to get to an open prison and have this preparation for a normal life. So we wanted to follow their journey and see if they would actually get this opportunity to experience normalization.
I was going to ask you about that because, it appears that it's Bastoy is very successful in terms of lowering the number of prisoners who reoffend. And by all accounts, they're less expensive to run. And yet, why is the government shutting down these prisons? It doesn't make very much sense unless something else is going on.
Well, it's a question of politics, and in Norway, as in many other countries, there are different views on how should we treat offenders, and especially when it comes to serious offenders like people who have committed murder. Should they be able to experience this, free way of imprisonment as they do at Bastøy? Not everyone is in favor of that. Having said this, it's also definitely a question of economy, because some of these prisons, they're not actually more expensive to run, but you need maintenance, and you need to just to keep the spaces open there. The argument that was presented for closing them down was actually a question of money.
There's a moment in the film that was a little puzzling, because Trond is returned to a high security prison because he's been charged with a new crime, which isn't detailed in part of the film. But so could you explain the circumstances? Was it for an offense he had committed at Bastøy, or his former prison, or when he was out of prison?
Well, for a number of reasons, we could not go into details about this crime in the film, but he was charged with a crime that happened before he entered Bastøy.
But while he was in prison?
No, before he was imprisoned. But the case came up at a later point. But it turned out that he could have been given the chance to return to Bastøy, because he was not, the trial didn't go through, so he was not He was not judged.
So in essence, this was something that happened on the outside. That even though he was already in prison, how long had he been in prison when they decided that to charge him with a new crime? I mean, it's a little odd for me, you know. I mean, you know, the U.S. prison system is nothing to what we would say write home about. And you know, Norway's approach looks way more humane than what happens in the U.S. But you know, it's pretty rare that someone, you know, unless they were, you know, kind of a career criminal, and to have them charged after the fact because they're already in prison.
Yes, it's a bit complicated to go into this, but in Norway, if you are in an open prison and you're charged with the new crime, you will be brought back to custody. And that means you're brought back to high security prison. For Trond, this was a very big challenge because he was on his way, you know, moving forward, wanting to kind of looking at society across the water. And then it was a major drawback for him personally, for obvious reasons. So as you will see in the film, this had consequences.
Yeah. So where are the two of them today?
Trond is released. He is. He has served his sentence, and he's now a free man, and trying to build up a new life. Benjamin is still at Bastøy. He started his education because he has still a few more years left before he can apply to be transferred and move on. But he started his education. That's also a thing that you will get a chance if you are among the lucky ones. It's a very good opportunity to start educating while you are still imprisoned, and then you can actually apply for a job even from the island and start commuting as one of the ways to prepare and make the transition less complicated when you eventually are released.
And what are you working on next?
My next project is about school dropouts. So it's about, I'm taking a few steps back. What happens when kids, you know, at high school age start to drop out, they don't finish. This is a challenge in Norway. I imagine not only in Norway. No. And we want to look at what are the reasons why and how can we meet some of those needs that these teenagers have.
That sounds great. Is there a question that you wish someone would ask you about this film that no one's ever asked?
Well, I would like to have had some of the leaders for American justice system to ask, maybe not ask me, but ask themselves what would happen if the US started to make prisons like these, to build open prisons like Bastøy, and give people that opportunity. What effect would that have on society and on reoffending numbers? Well,
unfortunately for an awful lot of the people that are incarcerated in the U.S., it's become the replacement for the mental hospitals. And there are an awful lot of people who are you know, seriously mentally ill that are in prison, or, you know, substance abuse, which, you know, kind of is clearly part of both Benjamin and Trond's stories, that you know, the question is, why are they in prison to begin with? They really shouldn't be in prison. I mean, obviously the people who are violent and have committed violent offenses need to be in prisons for a certain period of time. But the question then becomes, for the people who are just clearly mentally ill or suffering from mental illness and or substance abuse, why are they there? It's, you know, it's the whole Black Lives Matter, defund the police, because what's happened in the US is that most of the resources have been transferred from social services to the police. And the police are not trained to be social workers. They're not trained to be counselors. They're not trained to be mental health professionals. You know, and so they respond in the only way that they know how, which is with force. And we end up having people who should never have really encountered the criminal justice system being stuck in that system, because that's the only place that apparently U.S. society is willing to fund, given that we have more people incarcerated than anywhere else in the world, perhaps with the exception of China. Well, thank you for participating in this Q&A. And thanks to the audience for watching. Remember, there are many other fascinating films to enjoy, so please tell your friends. And don't forget to vote for the Audience Award.
Thank you.